Good morning, Crosspoint Family Church. My name is Jose. Today we're looking at the book of Matthew, chapter 23, together as part of our ongoing study. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this. There's times in your life where you're getting pushed and pushed and pushed by colleagues, by friends, by family. They know all the right buttons, and eventually you just snap. I think if we're honest, we've all been there and experienced that and done that before. Jesus too had experienced that. He'd come into Jerusalem. He was on his way to die for us on the cross, and that was in the back of his mind. He knew that, and yet the Pharisees, they were pushing him and pushing him, and he eventually gave them a part of his own mind. Now, one's got to remember that the Pharisees were religious teachers that lived in those times when Jesus was walking the earth, and they would teach the book of the Old Testament, but Jesus could see straight through the hypocrisy in the lives of these Pharisees. They followed all the rules, they said all the right things, they outwardly they portrayed to be following what Jesus had said for them in the Old Testament, or what the Bible had said in the Old Testament, but on the inside it was a totally different story. And we see that today. We get Christians who go around and bash other Christians on the heads for sins they've committed. They do all of this with no love, and they do it so they make themselves feel better about themselves, at the same time pushing people down. That's what the Pharisees were doing. So this is not just a warning to the Pharisees, it's also a warning to us who are living in this day and age. Today we're going to look at a couple of verses from Matthew. We're looking specifically at verse 2 now. And it says, this is Jesus speaking, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach." So what the Pharisees were doing, they were teaching the right stuff, but they just weren't doing what they were preaching. Then if you look at verse 5, it says, "Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels in their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogue. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces, and to have men call them rabbi." Jesus gives 8 examples of these hypocrisies in the lives of the Pharisees. We're going to look at a couple of them today. So if we look at verse 24, it says, "You blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a whole camel." Now, just so you can appreciate what would be done in those days. Firstly, a gnat was seen as an unclean animal or bug. So they would put a fine cloth over their glass. They would pour the liquid into it in order to get this small gnat out. But at the same time, the irony is they would swallow a whole camel with their actions. The other verse we're going to look at is verse 28, where Jesus talks about the tombstones. Just to put some context to it, in those days it was deemed to be ceremonially unclean if you walked on top of a tombstone. So what they would do, they would brush the tombstones so that they were bright white. This would particularly help people when they're walking around at night, so they wouldn't stand on top of a tombstone and then be unclean. And the irony of it all was that underneath this white tombstone was rotting bones and decaying bodies, again showing the hypocrisy in all of it. So the challenge for us today is to look at our own lives and look how we treat others. The Pharisees did all of this with no love in their hearts. They taught the right things, but there was no love. So let's go about our days encouraging one another, but doing it all in love, just as Jesus did to us. Thank you for listening.